Everyone knows that superpowers just aren't real. Contrary to what you might have believed as a kid watching the Avengers, nobody can fly or harness the power of thunder or shoot webs. And even if that was the case, only a few extraordinary people would be able to harness such powers, right? But what if I told you that right now, sitting here in this room, every single one of us has a hidden superpower? And no, not the kind of superpower you would see at an elementary school talent show, but rather a very potent ability with massive potential waiting to be unlocked. And that is the power of memorization. I know, what a letdown. You probably thought I was going to teach you how to unlock telekinesis or how to see into the future. But trust me, once you truly understand what memorization is all about and how such a simple skill perfected can change your life, I think you might start to get what I'm on about. There are many techniques that we may use to memorize information, such as by making use of repetition, mnemonics, sometimes even writing things out. And sometimes we can memorize information without even thinking about it. I'll tell you a funny story. So around 7 years ago, my family and I embarked on a trip to the States for a long-awaited family reunion. And for those of you who may not know, it's important to note that if you're traveling to the States with the last name Khan, chances are you're going to have a really interesting experience with Border Patrol. Anyway, unsurprisingly, we were pulled to the side for some questioning about the purpose of our trip. And then came the moment of truth when they asked for the address of where we were headed to. And it was a classic catch-22 situation because thanks to the strict policies at the border, they make you lock your phones away in the car. So it's not like you can just pull out Google Maps and just see the address. So we were in a bit of a tough situation and a pickle, but then something suddenly hit me. I could actually remember the address. But how? Turns out that I had glimpsed at it for a mere split second when inputting it into Google Maps. Man, even the stern-faced officer was so shocked that a 10-year-old had such an unexpected moment of recollection. So then, how do we actually memorize information? Simply put, when the human brain is exposed to new information, it forms connections between nerve cells, which are known as synapses. And these synapses are what essentially form the basis of our memory. But in order to fully commit something to memory, these connections must be strong. And that strength is determined by the amount of times we're exposed to certain information. And this explains why we need so much practice to make perfect, because repetition is actually very necessary for the mind to remember things. And the more things we can remember, the more our minds can grow. Memorization will enhance your mind's ability to learn and to effortlessly retain information. So, around quite a while ago, I was an average third grade student, and my report cards consisted of mainly B's and some A's here and there, nothing too special. But then the next year, I experienced a very pivotal change in my life. And that was, I began memorizing the Quran. And for those of you who may not know, it's the holy book for Muslims, and it's over 600 pages long, and it's written in Arabic. So I'm sure you can imagine that for me, especially with Arabic not as my native language, memorization, especially in the very early stages, was an extremely difficult task. To just commit a few lines and a few verses to memory required so much commitment and so much dedication and so much effort. But with enough time and with enough repetition, enough times looking at the verses, reading them aloud, listening to the recitation, I began to develop an aptitude for memorization. And with enough exposure to the pages and to the verses, I began to feel like I could see them without even looking at the page. So I progressed from memorizing just a few verses and a few lines every day to eventually half a page, and with enough time, I was memorizing a whole page every day. And personally, for me, there is this sense of clarity every time I would memorize. And I began to see this with not just the Quran, but with everything else I was learning on a daily basis. And so I went from being an average B student to scoring straight A's and being at the very top of my class. And I was never a gifted student or a prodigy of any sorts, but becoming familiar with memorization allowed me to understand things so much better and so much clearer. Outside of school, I became a lot more creative, and I began to find out-of-the-box solutions for challenges that I faced. I could reason better, and I could think deeper. So it was evident that memorization didn't just make me good at remembering things, but it made me good at every single thing I set my mind to. And it's because of this that I realized that there's so much potential waiting to be unlocked if we just apply ourselves a little bit. Now, I don't want you to get me wrong here. I'm not saying that our intellectual growth is solely based on the amount of books or chapters that we can memorize, but I'm just saying that in order to unlock this power and this potential of memorization, we need to be consistent in memorizing anything. So, a really good example of this is the taxi drivers in London. Because in order to become one, you actually have to know the location of every street and every landmark in the city. Google Maps is not your best friend here. You simply must be able to navigate the most efficient route from one point to another in a very unorganized street system that dates back centuries. Now, while this might seem like a very grueling task for these taxi drivers, a study conducted by the University College of London actually found that the hippocampus, which is the part of the brain responsible for memory and learning of these cab drivers, was much larger than that of the average person. And this just goes to show another one of the gems of memorization, that it expands our intellectual capacity in a way that goes beyond just allowing us to excel academically, but it allows us to excel in all aspects of our life. Because it makes our brains agile and it makes them rapid. So just think for a moment what you can do with that kind of power. And remember, this is not something that's hard to achieve. It's not that hard to masterfully memorize. As long as you're consistent in putting your memory to the test, you soon will also realize this potential. So there are many techniques that we can use to better our ability of memorization, but today I will list out 4 of the most important, the roots of it all. Number 1, which is the most important, is that when you're memorizing, you actually understand the meaning and content of what it is you're memorizing. You're not just memorizing words on a page. And this is so crucial because the more you get your mind involved with all of the context and all of the details, you're essentially acquainting your brain with that information, allowing you to develop this relationship with that content that makes you remember things on tap. So this is very important. Number 2, you need to exercise repetition. Just as I had mentioned earlier, repetition is really important because the more you expose your brain to certain information, the more capable it will be of retaining that knowledge. But I understand that repetition gets boring and it gets monotonous. But the key here is that it doesn't have to be. The key to utilizing repetition for optimized memorization is that it's done in a way that suits the way that you learn best. Find out the senses that you use the most when learning. For example, maybe you're a very strong auditory learner, and you could go for hours on end listening to a podcast. Or maybe you just need that really detailed cell diagram to remember where all the ribosomes and lysosomes are. So you can see that the key here is to hone a learning style that you personally can commit to for long periods of times, which allows you to repeatedly expose yourself to that information without getting bored. Number 3, another key of memorization is that we make use of landmarks. So just like how you might use the memory of a few familiar buildings or signs along a route to remember how to get to your destination, what's really important is that you know landmarks and the new information that you are memorizing. So a very common example of this actually is that we use keywords as a sort of mental signpost to remember specific information in a large body of text. To test this out, why don't we try using keywords to memorize Newton's first law? So Newton's first law states that an object at rest remains at rest, and an object in motion remains in motion at a constant velocity unless acted on by an external force. So at first glance, this seems really intimidating to memorize and very wordy. But from this passage, let's extract 4 keywords that we can use to break it up into manageable chunks that we can actually memorize. So, number 1, rest. And this refers to an object at rest remaining at rest. Number 2, motion. An object in motion stays in motion. Number 3, velocity. At a constant velocity. Number 4, force. And this relates to the action of that external force. So you can see that now that we've broken up this large and wordy law into just 4 keywords, it's so much more easier to memorize, and it immensely reduces that effort needed to memorize even the most complicated of information. So that's another key. And for the final key, number 4, it's that you test your memory. After you feel like you've looked at, read, heard the information enough times, and that you understand the content and all the keywords, and you feel that the knowledge has made its home in your brain, you have to put your memory to that test, because having a good feeling about it is never enough. You must be certain in your ability to remember. Move the cue cards out of sight and formulate simple questions about the topic to answer. So, going back to our example with Newton's first law, let's see if I can remember anything. Let me ask myself, what happens to an object at rest? Oh, that's right. It stays at rest unless it's acted on by an external force. All right, that's good, but still, it's not the entire law that I asked myself about here. So, what happens to an object that is in motion? Let's think about it. Oh, that's right. It stays in motion unless it's acted on by an external force. So you can see that we've mastered answering these small questions, and now after we've done that, we can put it all together to commit the big picture to memory. Let me ask myself, what is Newton's first law? Well, it's that an object at rest stays at rest, and that an object in motion stays in motion at a constant velocity unless acted on by an external force. And there you go. We've just memorized Newton's first law. So you can see, by using these techniques, it's actually not that hard to memorize. But the key is that you just have to get your mind used to it. And the best way to do this is by starting small. So next time you embark on a journey somewhere, instead of using Google Maps all the time, try to remember the routes and use landmarks as a guide to get to your destination. Don't rely on the Maps app all the time. And when doing simple math, don't pull out the calculator. Do it in your head. Test yourself a little bit. Just because you have all this technology at your fingertips doesn't mean that you should become reliant on it. And don't rely on your phone's saved contacts list to remember a phone number. I'm just going to put it out there that if you can't remember your mom and dad's phone numbers, that's just purely disappointing. So you can see we need to remember these phone numbers. And it's also imperative that we remember important contacts so that if we're ever in an emergency situation, we know how to get help. That being said, I think we can all agree that it's a good thing that we remember how to call 911. So the key here is to never let yourself become reliant on technology, because the very essence of our memory is that it allows us to hold knowledge without being dependent on anything external. But the advent of technology has removed from us this apparent need to utilize our memorization skills and our memory, because we're presented with all the information we desire right at our fingertips. And it's come to the point where It's almost like an external memory drive for our minds. And for me, that's scary. Because if we're fully dependent on technology to just remember things, what will guarantee our independence when it comes to our daily lives? And that's why having the ability to memorize is so powerful. It liberates us. Our memory frees us, and its protection rests in our hands. Dementia and diseases like Alzheimer's are becoming commonplace worldwide, especially in progressively aging nations such as Canada, Japan, and many more. And in such illnesses, damage to and loss of nerve cells, as well as those synapses connecting them, severely impact an individual's ability to remember things, along with their vision, spatial abilities, and just about everything else that they would rely on their minds for. There is no cure for these illnesses. However, the good news is that there is a way to prevent this from occurring to you, and that's by keeping your mind active. Just like how you would hit the gym and work out to keep the rest of your body healthy, you need to keep exercising your brain. Frequently reading, learning new skills and sports, even engaging in meaningful conversations with others, really anything that will consistently and healthily stimulate your brain, and building as well as strengthening more and more of these synapses that are the basis of our memory. This will protect us against all the mental and memory-related illnesses. So never doubt the importance of memorization, and don't take your memory for granted. Strengthen your mind, challenge it, and use it. Keep creating those new neural connections, and never let that stop, because you too can obtain a superpower. Thank you.